My parents called me useless when I refused to give my new house to my younger sister and her husband. Dad called and said, "We no longer see you as family from today." I calmly said, "Okay, thank you." And I ended the call. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me thank you for your continuous support. If you love stories like this one, support us by subscribing to this channel and comment where you are watching us from. It will be great to hear from you. Now let's jump into the details of what happened. I remember the first time I turned the key in the front door, my front door. The soft click of the lock opening felt louder than any applause I'd ever heard. It wasn't just a house. It was the tangible proof that I had made it, that every sleepless night, every overtime shift, every time I swallowed my pride and kept going despite being overlooked by my own family, it all led here. The walls were bare, the air smelled like fresh paint and possibility, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could exhale. Buying that house was the hardest thing I'd ever done. No one helped me with the down payment. No one offered to co-sign or lend me advice. My parents didn't even know I was house hunting. I didn't tell them because, in my gut, I already knew they wouldn't be happy for me. Not really. My younger sister, Melinda, had always been the golden child. She didn't have to earn love. It just came to her in waves. I had spent my entire life trying to be good enough, responsible enough, loyal enough, but it was never enough. And yet, somehow, I still hoped that this house might change that. It didn't. They visited the house once. My mom barely glanced around, arms crossed, like she was unimpressed. Dad made a comment about how modest it was, which was his code for "you could have done better." But it was Melinda's comment that changed everything. She stood in the kitchen, laughing like it was a joke, and said, "You know, this would be perfect for me and Eric. We've been struggling to find a place since the wedding." I blinked, unsure if I heard her right. "You mean, you're moving soon?" I asked. "No," she said, grinning. "I mean, this could be our place. You don't even need all this space." I thought she was joking. I laughed. She didn't. Later that night, my parents sat me down in the living room, my living room, and made their case. Melinda and Eric were just starting out. They were under financial strain. It would mean a lot to the family if I could support them, and that support meant handing over my house. Not loaning it. Not renting it. Giving it. Like a birthday present. I couldn't speak for a moment. My chest tightened. "Are you serious?" I finally asked. Dad nodded like it was obvious. "She's your sister. Family supports each other. Where was that support when I needed help buying this place?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even as anger began to rise like bile. Mom sighed. "That was different. You're older. You've always been more independent." Translation: "We never thought you mattered enough to invest in." "I'm not giving away my house," I said, voice firm. "I worked too hard for this." What followed was an explosion I never saw coming. Dad stood up, furious, and told me I was selfish, cold-hearted, that I had no loyalty, that Melinda had always been more of a daughter to them than I ever was. His words cut deep, but I didn't let them show. I sat still, listening, as he said something that would change my life. "We no longer see you as family from today." And just like that, the years of trying to earn their love, the birthdays spent trying to impress them, the holidays pretending we were close, all of it cracked and fell away like old plaster. I looked at him, my heart racing but my voice steady, and said, "Okay, thank you." Then I stood up, walked them to the door, and locked it behind them. For the first time, I wasn't the child begging for approval. I was just me, and I had finally chosen myself. The phone rang 3 days after I told them no. I knew it would. My parents don't take rejection well, especially from me. They'd raised me to fold, to please, to apologize even when I was the one bleeding. So when I saw Dad's name flash across the screen, I sat for a moment, staring at it. My hand hovered over the decline button, but I answered. Not because I wanted to talk, but because a small, stupid part of me hoped maybe, just maybe, he'd called to say sorry. He didn't. "You made your choice," he said, skipping hello altogether. His voice was low, almost trembling, but not from sadness. No, this was anger, righteous, rehearsed. "I did," I replied. I didn't say it with pride or venom, just clarity. "You're a disgrace," he spat. "After everything we've done for you." That made me laugh. and that laugh must have set him off even more. "You ungrateful little," he started, then caught himself. "We're done. Don't come to the house. Don't call your mother. As far as we're concerned, you're no longer family." Something in my chest went still. Not broken, not aching, just still. I took a breath and said, calmly, "Okay, thank you." Then I ended the call. That was the last time I heard my father's voice for a full year. In the weeks that followed, silence became the new language between us. Birthdays came and went without so much as a text. My sister posted photos online of her and Eric smiling at brunches, at family dinners I hadn't been invited to. Mom stopped forwarding me her passive-aggressive Bible verses about forgiveness and family unity. No cousins reached out. Not even my aunt, who used to say I was the only one in the family with sense. They closed ranks like a fortress, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't pounding on the gates, begging to be let in. I sat quietly in my home, and let the silence do its work. But quiet isn't peace, not right away. Some nights I stared at the ceiling, trying to remind myself that I wasn't the villain in this story, that not handing over my house didn't make me selfish, that asking for boundaries wasn't betrayal. Still, I couldn't help but replay it, Dad's voice, low and final. "You're no longer family." Like I'd been fired from a job I never really signed up for. I remembered all the small things growing up. How Melinda always got the bigger birthday parties, the newer clothes, the louder praise. I got gold stars for being dependable, responsible. They clapped for her. They leaned on me. And when I needed to lean, the space beneath me was always empty. When I got my first part-time job at 16, they took a portion of every paycheck to teach me responsibility. Melinda started working at 20 and kept every cent. Mom even helped her open a savings account. I paid for my own textbooks in college. She dropped out of her degree program and got a car. None of this came crashing into me all at once. It was like dust settling in the sunlight. I had always known, but now I could see it, crystal clear. And still, I grieved. Not for them. For the version of me that kept trying. I went to therapy. I journaled. I sat with the guilt that surfaced every time I felt relief instead of regret. I learned what boundaries actually meant. Not just saying no, but holding the door closed when someone keeps trying to push through it. Around the 4th month of silence, I took down the family photos I'd had in my hallway. Not out of spite, out of necessity. Every time I passed them, I felt something twist inside me. I replaced them with prints I liked, landscapes, abstract shapes, soft colors. My space began to reflect me, not the performance I'd put on for decades. Sometimes, I'd see Melinda's posts, always carefully curated for sympathy. "Family is everything," she wrote under a photo of her hugging my parents. Even when it's hard, I didn't engage. I didn't comment. I just watched, detached, like I was observing someone else's life. Because by then, I had started to build a new one. And yet, no matter how much progress I made, there was always a whisper in the back of my mind. What if they come back? What if they ask for something again? What will you say? I didn't have an answer yet. I only knew this. The person I was becoming would not betray herself to please people who never chose her in the first place. But life has a way of testing you just when you think you've passed the final exam. And almost exactly a year later, the phone rang again. It wasn't Dad this time. It was Mom. And she was crying. They say healing isn't linear. That's true. It zigzags and spirals and sometimes doubles back so far, you wonder if you've made any progress at all. But by the time a full year had passed since that phone call, the one where Dad disowned me like I was some bad investment, I could say, honestly, that I was okay. Not perfect. Not unbothered. But okay. In the months that followed that night, I did what I'd never done before. I chose myself, over and over again. I learned to love silence. In the beginning, it had felt like a punishment, the kind that prickles your skin and gnaws at your thoughts. But eventually, silence became a kind of sanctuary. I could hear my own voice for once, not the echo of their expectations or the clanging of guilt dressed up as duty. I'd wake up on Saturdays with no obligations to pretend, no calls to screen, no dinners to endure with clenched teeth and a fake smile. The house grew warmer, not because of the decor, but because I filled it with presence, mine. I painted the guest room a soft, dusky blue, turned it into a reading nook with a velvet armchair and a tall lamp. I hung art without asking for anyone's opinion. I hosted a few small dinners, real friends, the kind who didn't expect me to carry the weight of the evening. One night we sat on the floor with cheap wine, eating Thai takeout straight from the containers, laughing until our stomachs hurt. I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like to be chosen. My therapist, Candace, helped me see the full picture. You were never raised to have boundaries, she said one day, after I explained the whole story again. You were raised to meet needs, fill roles, keep the peace. I was the fixer, I said, nodding. They broke things, and I cleaned it up. You stopped cleaning, she said softly. That's why they're angry. You refuse to be complicit anymore. I sat with that for a long time. Refusing to give Melinda the house wasn't just about property. It was about breaking a pattern. For the first time in my life, I didn't just say no, I meant it. I enforced it. I endured the consequences without crawling back. There were days when I missed them. Not them, exactly, but the idea of them. The idea of parents who saw me. A sister who valued me. I grieved that fantasy like a death. And with every wave of sadness came something else too. Relief. I didn't miss the tightrope walking, the stomach knots, the ever-moving goalposts. I missed the version of me who believed that love was something I could earn, if only I worked hard enough. I began to write letters I never sent. One to Dad, where I told him exactly how that phone call felt. One to Mom, where I asked why she never defended me. One to Melinda, where I said nothing but, I see you. Writing them didn't make me feel better, but it made the truth real. It was a small way of putting the pain outside of myself, where I could examine it without letting it rot me from the inside. Then, just when the air started to feel easier to breathe, when I could sit in my backyard with a cup of coffee and not feel haunted, the universe decided to stir the dust. It started with a message from cousin Lisa. She always sat on the fringes of family drama, too polite to take sides but never truly neutral. Hey, she wrote, I don't know if you heard, but your dad's been really sick. It's bad. I stared at the message for a long time. My first reaction wasn't sadness. It was skepticism. I hadn't heard a word from anyone in almost 12 months, and now this? Still, I said nothing. I didn't reply. If Lisa thought that was enough to draw me back in, she didn't know me anymore. 2 days later, my phone rang. I saw the name, Mom, and for the first time in a year, I didn't feel afraid to answer. Hello. She was crying before she even said my name. Please, she said. Please don't hang up. I didn't. Not yet. It's your father. He's in the hospital. It's serious. I didn't know who else to call. Melinda. She's struggling. We're all struggling. There was a pause, like she was waiting for me to offer something. But I didn't speak. I let the silence do the talking. Look, she continued, voice cracking. I know things have been bad. I know we said things we shouldn't have. But we need you. Now you need me. I thought I wasn't family anymore, I said, my voice calm. Not cold, just factual. I didn't mean that, she whispered. Your father didn't mean it. He said it clearly, I said. And I believed him. Another long silence. I'm begging you, she said. We don't have the money for his care. We're behind on everything. Melinda and Eric are barely holding on. There it was. The ask. The pitch. The familiar guilt starting to slither its way back in. But this time, I was different. I'm sorry, I said. But I've moved on. And before she could say more, I ended the call. My hand shook, not from regret, but from release. I sat down in the same chair where I'd answered Dad's call a year ago and realized just how far I'd come. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was just free. After I hung up, I sat there in the dim light of the hallway, staring at nothing. My phone was still in my hand, screen dark, but my mind buzzed like I was mid-storm. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel. I felt like someone who had finally, painfully, shut a door that should have never been opened in the first place. Mom hadn't called since. She hadn't texted. I suppose she thought I would, maybe after I had time to sit with her words. She was probably waiting for the guilt to settle in and take over like it always used to. But it didn't. Not this time. The thing is, I had grieved them already. When Dad said you're no longer family, something inside me had snapped. Yes, but something else had started to rebuild in its place. And what Mom didn't understand, what none of them ever understood, Was that when you've had to learn to love yourself after being denied that love from the very people who should have given it first? You don't unlearn that kind of strength overnight. Still, people talk. Family talks. Lisa messaged again. Then Eric. Then Melinda. Melinda's message was short, cold, and barbed in that signature way she'd mastered since childhood. He's dying, and you're too proud to lift a finger. You'll regret this when it's too late. I stared at that text for longer than I'd care to admit. Not because I believed her, but because some dark, lingering thread in me still feared that I could. Regret. That word had always been their favorite weapon. I had spent decades running from it, doing things I didn't want to do to avoid its sting. Going to dinners I hated. Giving up vacations so Melinda could go instead. Bailing them out of emergencies they created. And always being told, directly or indirectly, that if I dared to choose myself, I'd regret it. But now, I asked myself the question out loud. Would I regret this? And honestly, I didn't think I would. I remembered that night a year ago. The offer, no, the demand for my house. I remembered Dad calling me a disgrace, telling me I was no longer part of the family. And I remembered the way I hung up, calm, sure. I remembered the months that followed, the silence, the healing, the rebirth. Why was I expected to undo all of that now? Because he was sick? Of course I didn't want him to be sick. I didn't wish this on him. But I also couldn't pretend that his illness changed who he had been or what he had said to me. It wasn't like he called to apologize. He didn't even try. No one did. They only reached for me when they needed something. That realization, as painful as it was, brought with it a kind of clarity. I wasn't being cold. I wasn't being cruel. I was just done. And being done didn't mean I didn't feel. I did. God, I felt everything. I remembered being 12 and standing in the hallway as Dad berated me for letting Melinda take the blame for breaking a vase she clearly broke. He had stared me down, fury in his eyes, and said, "She's younger. You should know better." That was his mantra. I always should have known better. Which really meant, you will always carry the weight, so she never has to. At 23, when Melinda's first engagement fell apart, I helped pay for the therapy she refused to attend. At 28, I co-signed a lease for her when she promised she'd never miss a payment, and then vanished for 2 months while the landlord hunted me down. And every time, they told me, this is what family does. But when I bought my home, my symbol of independence, my reward for years of sacrifice, they didn't celebrate. They saw it as an asset to be reassigned to her. So no, I wouldn't regret this. Because I finally saw the truth. Family doesn't make you bleed to keep their hands clean. A week passed. Then 2. I heard through Lisa that Dad's condition had stabilized for now. There were still issues. Bills piling up. A long road ahead. But they were managing, just barely. She told me this with a cautious tone, like she was still dangling bait on a hook, waiting for me to bite. I didn't. Instead, I turned off notifications from anyone in that family tree. I needed the quiet again. Not because I was avoiding responsibility, but because I had finally realized that I wasn't responsible for them at all. I spent more time outside, sat in my backyard, watched the wind move through the trees. I cooked elaborate meals for myself, not for company, not for show. Just because I could. I woke up every morning in a house I fought for, and I walked through each room like it was sacred. Because it was. This house was my boundary, brick and mortar. It was proof that I could build a life not rooted in obligation, but in choice. And I chose not to go back. It didn't take long for the silence to morph into noise. Not from my parents, they stayed quiet, which almost hurt more, but from the outer orbit, the cousins, the distant aunties, the family friends who always hovered just enough to have an opinion, but never enough to truly know anything. The calls started rolling in first. Unknown numbers. I didn't answer. Then the messages. From Aunt Jean, "Your mother is exhausted. You're breaking her heart." From Cousin Derek. "Whatever happened between you and your dad, this isn't the time to be petty." From an old family friend I barely remembered. "You only get one father." I wanted to scream. Not because of the words. They were just the usual scripts, recited without thought, but because not one of them had reached out a year ago. When I was exiled. When I was told I no longer belonged. Where were their sermons then? Their sudden love for reconciliation? It was always the same. Show up when there's a crisis. show up when someone else is hurting, but never when I was the one bleeding out. Melinda sent me a voice note. I played it once. Just once. I can't believe you're doing this, she said, her voice thick with contempt. He's sick. This isn't the time to prove a point. You're being selfish. You don't know how much Mom is suffering. I hope you realize you've chosen your pride over your family. But then again, you always thought you were better than us, didn't you? I sat with those words like I used to sit with pain, quietly, trying to dissect it. Was I being selfish? Was this pride? But I knew the answer already. No, this wasn't pride. This was protection. Because if I cracked the door open even an inch, they'd flood back in. Not with apologies, not with accountability, but with expectation. And I had spent enough of my life suffocating under the weight of what they expected from me. I wrote in my journal that night. It's not pride that keeps me silent. It's survival. Still, I won't lie and say I wasn't tempted. Guilt has a way of showing up even when you've barricaded the door. It creeps in through the vents, through the memories. I had moments, quiet, lonely moments, when I nearly picked up the phone. When I pictured Dad's face in a hospital bed and felt the tug of obligation, the soft lie that said, maybe this time they'll be different. But I remembered how I felt that day in my own living room, being told to give it away. How Mom didn't speak up. How Dad's words felt rehearsed, like he'd been waiting for an excuse to cast me out. How Melinda watched it all happen and said nothing. And most of all, how I had finally said no, not just to the house, but to all of it. No to the emotional manipulation. No to the unspoken rules that only applied to me. No to being the dependable one, the fixer, the background character in someone else's life. That no cost me everything, but it gave me me. So when the relatives whispered, when Facebook cousins posted vague statuses about people who abandon family when things get tough, I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. Because here's the thing. When you draw a boundary, people will test it, not because they don't understand, but because they do. And they want to see if you'll break your own rules just to make them comfortable again. But I didn't. Not this time. Not ever again. And even if no one else said it, I was proud of that. I was proud of me. It had been 3 months since that call from Mom. Since her tearful voice cracked over the phone, asking me to come back, to the role, to the silence, to the weight of being the family's quiet savior. I didn't return her call, and she didn't make another. I suppose they got the message. News of Dad came sporadically, like static over an old radio, never directly from them, but filtered through the grapevine. He was out of the hospital. Weak, but stable. The bills were stacking up. Melinda and Eric were struggling. They'd moved in with my parents temporarily, which I'm sure made for quite the dynamic. I pictured them all under one roof again, my mother sighing through every sentence, Melinda whining about stress, and my father grumbling about the television volume. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger. No smug satisfaction. No yearning to be part of it. Just distance. Clear, healthy, blessed distance. I had always thought closure needed to come with some grand gesture. An apology. A teary reunion. Someone finally saying, you were right. We were wrong. But real closure, I learned, often comes silently. In a quiet morning when you wake up and realize you haven't thought of them in days. In the way your heart doesn't lurch when their names come up in conversation. In the soft peace of a boundary kept. My home had become a haven. Not just physically, but emotionally. It had seen me through every part of this journey, grief, rage, clarity, freedom. I had painted the walls not to impress anyone, but to please myself. I'd filled the rooms with light and books and music, with meals I cooked alone and dances I danced when no one was watching. I had made this place mine, the way I'd made my life mine. Sometimes, I stood in the kitchen with a cup of tea and imagined what would have happened if I'd said yes. If I'd handed the keys to Melinda and let her move in with her endless complaints and her sharp tongue. If I'd once again been the quiet shadow making space for someone else to shine. And I knew I would have drowned. Not from losing the house, but from what it symbolized, that no matter how far I'd come, they could still snap their fingers and pull me back. But I didn't go back. I chose myself. I didn't make a grand announcement. I didn't burn bridges with Instagram captions or dramatic posts. I simply stopped showing up where I wasn't valued. And in time, the silence that once felt like exile became a sanctuary. One day, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. I knew the handwriting, it was Mom's. Inside was a single card, pale blue, with gold lettering that read, "Thinking of you." No apology. No explanation. Just that. I held it for a long time, and then I threw it away. Because thinking of me wasn't the same as choosing me. Loving me in the abstract wasn't enough. Not anymore. There was a time I would have clung to that card like a lifeline. Would have read it 10 times, analyzed every word, searched for meaning in the silence. But I'd outgrown that need. I no longer sought crumbs from a table I helped build but was never invited to sit at. These days, I wake up with peace, not performance. I go to sleep without replaying arguments in my head. I don't brace for phone calls or wonder if I've disappointed someone again just by existing on my own terms. I walk through my home, the one they tried to take, and I smile. Because every inch of it is a monument to the version of me that finally learned to say no, to draw a line, to stand on her own. And if I could go back to that moment when Dad said, "We no longer see you as family," I'd still say the same thing. Okay, thank you. Because it was never about them seeing me. It was about me finally seeing myself. If this story moved you or reminded you of your own journey with family and boundaries, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more raw, honest narratives that dig deep into the heart of what it means to choose yourself. Your voice matters here. Drop a comment and let's talk about it. See you soon in the next story.